It's wonderful to have you joining us. Goodness, we've really noticed that these seminars have been popular with you all, and this is now our fourth in the series. And goodness gracious, there are lots of you. Thank you so much for joining us. As you would well know, we are with the Monash Centre for Consciousness and Contemplative Studies. My name is Megan Flamer. I'm the Director of Innovation here at the Centre. And today we will be examining burnout. But whether you are, maybe you're driving, maybe you're running around, maybe you are, have a spread of lunch in front of you, maybe you're watching this with a bunch of colleagues today, wherever you are, let's just take a moment to arrive. So if you're able, placing both of your feet on the floor and just taking a moment to notice your body. Notice how you're sitting. If you can feel your chair underneath you, maybe wriggle your toes a little bit, just coming into your body, into this moment. We'll take this opportunity to also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from wherever you are joining us, whether that's here in Australia, here in Melbourne, overseas. And just taking a moment to acknowledge the safety, the clean air that we enjoy, the presence that's possible, and the opportunity for all of us to discover something today together. Gently bringing yourself into the space with us. And again, thank you so much for joining us. This our fourth seminar in our series of meditations and the mind here with the Monash Centre for Consciousness and Contemplative Studies. So there is a bit of housekeeping as always. This will be recorded. So just know that you'll be able to revisit any of the pieces of this and rewatch if you'd like to. Please, at any time, do add your questions. We might get to your question. We'll be monitoring those questions throughout and getting to as many of them as we possibly can, and hopefully answering all of the questions that you might have about burnout. It's my huge pleasure to introduce someone, maybe a stranger to you, but I very strongly doubt it, Professor Craig Hassard. Craig is the M3CS Director of Education. He's the coordinator of mindfulness programs across the whole of Monash University and beyond. He has interest in mind-body medicine, obviously mindfulness. He developed the world's first mindfulness curriculum for the Monash medical curriculum. He's also been awarded an OAM, no big deal. I know that this always embarrasses you. I get to rave about how amazing you are. But he's also the designer of our Navigating Burnout program. And if you want to dive more deeply into any of these concepts, that's a perfect way to do it. So Craig, thank you so much for doing this today and answering all of these deep and burning questions that people have about burnout.
Well, thank you very much, Megan. It's great to be with you. And today I'm on the other side of the fence, as it were, not doing the interrogation, but being interrogated. So please be kind to me, Megan.
Feel free to interrogate me back, but I'll probably just ping pong it back across to you and be like, I think we have some research on this one, if we can ask you those. I think we should start with sort of the obvious thing. What exactly is burnout?
Yeah, burnout's a word that's used quite a lot these days. We kind of, I've got the flu, etc. But it's a pretty imprecise word most of the time when people use it. It does mean something quite specific. So Maslach, so she developed the Maslach's burnout inventory and trying to look at what were the actual most essential components of burnout. And she came up with three essential elements that have been used in pretty much all the burnout research for the last few decades. The first one's emotional exhaustion, just feeling wrung out. We should distinguish it from depression. which is different, although sometimes they can overlap. Burnout can predispose to depression and etc. But it's not kind of lowered mood. It's just like feeling wrung out emotionally, emotional exhaustion, depersonalization. So we can get kind of very cynical and disconnected from people. That sort of human connection's not there. And of course, in healthcare, with COVID, for example, there was a lot of burnout, and so people are doing an amazing job, but the kind of that really caring human side of it sort of really starts to get a bit strained. And the third element is a lack of personal efficacy. We don't feel we're very effective in our job. We don't feel we're achieving much. What we're doing is not kind of that important. We're just sort of going through the motions. So they're the three: emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and a lack of personal efficacy. So that's what it kind of means. But it is certainly a word that's used a lot in common language these days.
It's really interesting as well, because you'll notice that people will often appropriate a term. For example, you say, oh yeah, I have PTSD from doing X, or I'm completely burned out from Y. When we're looking at the actual physical manifestations of this and how that can show up in the body, for example, what are some of and I know I'm kind of trying to get all of the negative stuff out of the way early so that we can really get into the tools and look at, like, what do we do? How do we work with this? But what can long-term burnout, or even, just even short-term burnout, what can that do to your body?
Well, because the emotions are involved, and anytime our emotions are involved, the body will be involved as well, because the body's always responding to our emotional states, for better or for worse. And so chronic stress, related to work most commonly, but can be related to things in general, can predispose us to burnout. But that chronic stress is associated with what's called allostatic load, a physiological wear and tear on the body that accumulates over time, not just over days, but weeks, months, years. So, and this sort of wear and tear is because we're activating the fight or flight response more than we need to, and not switching it off when we need to. So when we're walking down, a corridor from our car to our office, for example, we've got this kind of stress response tension grinding away in the background, and we're never noticing it, and we're never switching it off, because that response is really meant to be for when we're wrestling tigers and bears. And well, I suppose we don't have tigers and bears in Australia, but wombats and and boxing with kangaroos. So that sort of that activation in the long term predisposes us to a lot of chronic illnesses. So it can accelerate the progression of those chronic illnesses. It can impair our immunity and our resistance to coughs, colds, and infections. It can activate a lot of the risk factors for illnesses like heart disease. The blood pressure's constantly going up until it kind of starts to stay up. It's like think of it, if I was to use another metaphor, it's like the thermostat's turned up too high, and because we do that so consistently, it doesn't actually reset lower when it needs to. So anyway, there are certainly some effects associated with our long-term physical health of doing that.
And is that where the exhaustion comes from? Is it that you've had that up too high for too long? I mean, one of the things that I've heard bandied around is the term adrenal exhaustion, for example. Is that tied to this?
Well, the adrenal glands are very involved with activating that fight or flight response. And we don't often use, in medical terms, the term adrenal exhaustion, but it's kind of like we're pumping out so much cortisol and so much adrenaline that the system gets conditioned to that. And it's not just what's those mediators of the stress response, but it's also what's happening to us neurologically. So the stress circuits in the brain over time get kind of sensitized, if you like. They get more reactive. Even the segments of our DNA that code for the stress response over time kind of become turned up, if you like. It's what we call epigenetics, but the genes, it's like turning up the volume on those stress genes so that they're going from just humming in the background to screaming, in a sense, in terms of activating the fight or flight more than we need to. That's a lot of the bad news. Bad news without solutions and so on is just like depressing, but solutions, all of these are reversible effects. And we need to understand that we can get better at recognizing this sort of response and better at being able to switch it off.
So, okay, I think it's always a good moment, as we like to say at M3CS, but always a good moment to look at what does mindfulness have to do with any of this? We've talked about a lot of the bad effects and especially the physiological effects, which I think will often be the first thing that somebody would notice. My stomach is churning, I've got sweaty hands, I'm not feeling good. How do we bring in mindfulness to this as a solution potentially?
Yeah, well, it's more than just sitting down and practicing a little 5 or 10 minute, relaxation exercise once or twice a day. It's really learning to be more mindful in how we use our energy and focus and mind during the day. So mindfulness practices, one of the core things that they do is they cultivate self-awareness. So we can become more aware of or in touch with the state of our body, to notice when it's activating the stress response, when it doesn't need to be noticing when we're revving our engine, when we don't need to, etc. So the physical awareness is the first thing, but also aware of our emotional response and attitudes and reactions. And also to become aware of what's going on in the mind, because one of the things that happens with burnout, it's not just the demands that are coming at us, it's the overthinking, it's the worrying, it's the ruminating, it's the procrastinating, it's the avoiding, it's the frustration. So if we've got a lot drawing on our time and energy for one reason or another, the demands are pretty high, we need to be very, very careful with how we're using our energy and time. And so one of the things that awareness can do for us, I'll use that term interchangeably with mindfulness, but one of the things it can do is to help us to realize when we're burning more energy than we need to. So when we're carrying tension we don't need to, when we're experiencing frustration and irritation, and we're burning precious energy and time in doing that, then that's a waste. And it means that we've got less that we can use for the actual work that we need to do. So mindfulness, it's more than just sitting down, doing a little bit of meditation. It's bringing that awareness into how we use our time, our focus, the mind, and how we notice what's going on in our body as well as we go about our day-to-day life.
One of the great descriptions that I really love in noticing what's coming at you, in the movie The Matrix, those of you, I keep having students who were born after The Matrix was actually released, which depresses me somewhat. But if we're seeing bullets coming towards us, often, you won't notice until it actually hits your body. But in the practice of mindfulness and slowly becoming more and more aware of what's coming at you, what are your surroundings, how am I feeling about them, it starts becoming more that you can actually see the stressful time coming towards you or potential burnout coming closer and closer. And you have the ability to actually move so that you can, that's my best Neo impression, actually move so that the bullet could go past you, or that you take time earlier to take time out for self-care, for taking a moment, eating better, maybe getting a little bit of extra sleep before you're getting to a point of too much stress or tension in your body.
Yeah, well, some of the things, it's not just the amount of work, but some of the things have been found to be associated with the higher risk of burnout include, say, things like a lack of meaning in the work that you're doing. Yeah, it just feels pointless, just going through the motions. And so, for example, finding meaning, our intrinsic sense of motivation, what's really motivating us, why are we doing what we're doing, kind of to remember those sorts of things, to get in touch with those things. The work we might be doing might be really, really important and valued by a lot of people. But if we forget that, if it just becomes going through the motions, then it's not helpful. But we derive a lot of energy from finding meaning in what we're doing. But another thing is like a lack of control. So when people are in a work environment, they feel like they have very little control or input into decision making. And so people are much more vulnerable under the right circumstances to experience burnout. And there are two aspects of control. So most of that focuses on the external locus of control. Can I control what's going on around me? My roster, my hours, my work conditions, the projects I work on or don't work on. And we might have some control, but no job's going to be 100% me just doing whatever I want to do. But more important from a mental health and wellbeing point of view is the internal locus of control. Are we in control of choosing our attitude to the given circumstances that we're confronted by? And so, and again, in this sort of cultivating awareness helps us to more consciously choose our attitude into the event. Okay, so it's not particularly what I would like at the moment, but this is just the time, the period that we're going through. I can choose, rather than an attitude of frustration and resistance, to acceptance. No, this is how it is at the moment, and it'll be like this for a period of time. But if we can choose our attitude, then it protects us from a lot of the stress that would otherwise come from having a very resistant, reactive attitude to the same events. So mindfulness can that awareness can operate on a number of different levels. It's more than just a little relaxation technique.
As a recovering control freak, it's still in some ways, triggers me a little bit to hear you say, okay, you just choose your attitude, because for me, I love controlling all of the elements. Like, I love controlling everything I can possibly control. And then I'll notice that frustration emerge, to try and control things that you can't control. Other people, what people say to you, all of the circumstances of your day. Can you go into a little more detail about, when you're talking about choosing an attitude? I think that's tricky for people. Can you say more about that?
Well, for example, somebody who goes into environments and, needs to sort of speak in public forums on a reasonably regular basis, I have trained myself to remember many, many times before I go into any situation that the IT may work or it may not work. Never to make an assumption that everything will work as it's meant to. So went to speaking at a conference, just last week, and they're having some, it was being streamed to many different places. It was quite a complex IT arrangement they had. And there were some real challenges with getting the IT working, right at the time I'm stepping up to give my keynote and so on. Now, if I step up in a situation like that, and I know what this feels like because I've done it to myself, is like, no, this should not be happening. It's terrible. No, it shouldn't be like this. It should be like this. And expecting everything to be as it's meant to be. If I do that, then I experience that kind of situation as extremely stressful. Whereas if I train that attitude that, yep, no, you do your planning, and hopefully people at the other end, they're dealing with complex arrangements and so on. But if you step up and for whatever reason, it's not working, if I can step up with an attitude and saying, okay, well, this was the plan, but this is what's actually happening, then I find that I can be much more adaptable and creative with just making the best of the situation as it is. Not how I'd like to be, but how it actually is. It's that kind of thing of, if I could use a metaphor, the first time I ever slept on a pair of skis, and I'm no great skier at all. So just your first time you slept on a pair of skis and somebody says, all right, now we're going to go downhill. And you're just having an introductory skiing lesson. And they say, lean forward, into the hill kind of thing. And you think, no way, you got So you're leaning back on your skis thinking that that's going to slow you down or help you. But what it does is you lose control as a result. When you lean forward, you shift the weights and you start to get control, in terms of how you're pointing your skis and so on. It's a little bit like that with life, I think. When we're going through life, leaning back, withdrawing from it, then we kind of lose that sense of adaptability and control. We need to lean forward. Acceptance commitment therapy, which is kind of based on mindfulness principles, really reinforces this attitude of acceptance and this committing yourself to life, to events. And that it kind of it really opens up the opportunity to learn more, to experience more, to actually feel safer in more situations, to trust ourselves more. It's that kind of thing, Megan. And I reckon we're all a work in progress as far as that's concerned. But that's that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's so interesting as well to notice that tension of the resistance, but I don't want to. It should be this other way, and noticing those tensions within yourself. We're getting some fantastic questions through, and I want to make sure that we get to loads of them. And a great comment from John saying, you're basically describing my autobiography of the last 7 years. And I'm like, good, John. Hopefully we can be as helpful as possible. So please do keep your questions coming on the Q&A button there. But, I think I always feel like to give these as examples and metaphors is great, but could you guide us through a little bit of an exercise to really, maybe give us the experience of what being with that resistance or allowing that to be there is?
Yeah. Well, in terms of practicing a mindfulness practice, well, I'll mention sort of what I had to teach myself in order to prevent burnout when I was a junior doctor and, doing horrendous hours, working for days at a time without a break kind of thing. And all that, I realized that there were two main things, which I would now call mindfulness, but I kind of intuitively made sense to me. The first one was to just be present, one job, one moment, one step at a time. And if walking down the corridor for 2 minutes from one ward to another is really, really simple, keep simple moments simple. Just be in the present moment meant there's nothing more complex happening than just walking. Just walk. And I found that a really, really full-on day was full of lots and lots of periods of rest, mental rest, physiological rest, which helped to conserve fuel, conserve energy, and to conserve that sort of mental overload that's associated with doing complex work for a long period of time, which, if we're not careful, leads to burnout. So that was the first thing. And you would call that the informal practice of mindfulness. So just being mindful in simple moments, whether walking or whatever. The second thing was the formal practice. Now, in the midst of a really full-on day, you may not have an opportunity for a 5 or a 10 or a 20-minute sit-down meditation practice. Where's Megan? She's not at the meeting. Oh, she's sitting in her office. She's meditating again. It's like, well, get her in here. You can't just. But what we can do is we can have lots of little moments. I like to call them commas to punctuate our day. So you might have just finished working on one complex thing, but you can just take a comma like a half minute or a minute to just stop and settle oneself and have a moment of awareness. So I'll take us through one of those if you like, just to get a bit of a taste. So for all of those of you at home or in your office or wherever you are, if you feel comfortable to, just sitting balanced in the chair and allowing the eyes to gently close. Now, we're not actually tuning out, we're just tuning in. The first thing is just to be aware of the body and noticing how it's feeling. Just noticing the body's posture. And if there are any tensions there that the body doesn't need to be holding, then just noticing them. And if you're happy to, just gently letting them go. Just being aware of the environment. So using the sense of hearing, just noticing sounds coming and going. And if you're happy to, just drawing in a deep breath and letting it out slowly and gently. Letting any movements of the mind, the coming and going of thoughts, just letting them come and go without having to get involved. If you're observing trains of thought, then just let the trains of thought come and go, but just sit on the platform and just watch them as they pass. Good. Now, whenever you're ready, allowing the eyes to gently open. Good. Good. So that might have been maybe just a bit more than a minute. But if you threw in 5 or 6 of those in a day, as you move from one activity, finish working on a project, about to go to a meeting, for example, just give yourself one of those. At the end of the meeting, another one. If you punctuate your day with a number of those, see what you notice about how you're operating in between times.
Such a lovely reset. I love it. I feel like I know.
And if I can just add one thing too, Megan, one of the traps we get into, and we all know what this feels like. I mean, it's not like you and I are sitting here talking about burnout to others, as if we've never, we're all challenged by circumstances, etc. But one of the traps we get into, which I try and avoid whenever I notice it, is thinking, I've got so much on, I've got so much to do, I don't have time to even take half a minute or a minute. I don't have time to just barreling on from one thing to another. And then we get into a cascade of mistakes of trying to complex multitask while we're doing things. What we're actually doing is the opposite of what we need to do. So those times when we feel like I don't have time to stop even for half a minute is exactly the time when we need to stop for at least half a minute.
Yes. Yeah. Well, because I can imagine that there are a lot of women, myself included, where multitasking is just an absolute default. And I know that it's not just women, but if you're managing family and, a billion different tasks, can we talk a little bit about task switching and multitasking? Because again, I think a lot of us have seen the research on multitasking. We know that it's not the ideal and it's actually difficult to actually properly do it at all, but it's still the way that we operate. How do we start to make those changes?
This is kind of a part of how we micromanage our attention, in a sense. So complex multitasking, just to, again, multitasking is a term like burnout that's thrown around a lot these days. But what we're actually meaning in complex multitasking is trying to do 2 or more complex things at exactly the same time. So you're trying to have a conversation with somebody about a topic at the same time as you're, maybe it's on the phone, but at the same time as you're writing an email to somebody, or driving your car while you're having a conversation with a work colleague. So 2 complex things at exactly the same time, complex multitasking. It doesn't work because there's the mental overload, the stress response, memory circuits are impaired, we make more errors. And if we're doing something like driving a car, we're 400% plus more likely to have a motor vehicle accident while we're doing it. We think, I can do it, but the human brain does not pay attention to 2 complex things at the same time. Now, efficient attention switching is a really useful skill, especially in certain work environments or a busy home life, but that's a bit different. It can look like multitasking, but it's not. So you're typing out a legal email, For example, if you're working in a law firm and the phone goes off. So you switch your attention from the email to the phone. So you're still only doing one thing. It's just a different thing. Somebody comes to ask you a question. Excuse me a moment. You cover the phone. You turn your attention to the person speaking. You listen to what they say. You give a sensible response. Good. You go back to the phone call. Finish that. Good. Go back to the email. Every time we do that, there's a little lag of rebooting what you were doing before, but, it might be under the circumstances what's necessary. So efficient attention switching. If you look at, experienced emergency medicine specialists, for example, looking at a monitor one moment, checking something with the patient the next moment, giving an instruction to maybe, the allied health professionals who are helping out one month, next month. So the attention's moving like a laser beam, but it's on one thing at a time. When we're trying to pay attention to multiple things at exactly the same moment, the attention's like a strobe light. It's just going all over the place, not helpful. So, and I think that there are a lot of women who are really, really good at efficient attention switching, but we should change our language around that. And because multitasking is something that is really not safe or effective.
I think we've had a perfect question around this, and I feel like you've just answered it, but maybe we can go a little more into it. Let's say you've come to a point where you're aware that you're burnt out, but you still have a million things to do on your calendar, and you've determined that all the events and tasks are important to you. How do you advise someone who's in this position right now?
Okay. Well, if a person really has done a review of all of that, and they are really important, okay. Firstly, prioritize what's most important, all the way from 1 to 10 or to 100, whatever it might be. Okay, and then just start with priority 1. And so one step, one job, one thing at a time. So with as little energy as it takes to do that job, just focus on that job. Maybe you start off with a brief mindfulness practice. Now focus on the job, but conserve all the energy. Often when we're working, when we're just walking down the corridor, there's this kind of intensity, that happens with chronic stress. We're holding on to tension in the body. We open a door, we use 10 times as much grip as we need to. We're holding a pen with a vice-like grip. We're actually bringing tension into everything. So remove all the unnecessary tension, but just one step, one job. You kind of making your footprint as light as you can make it as you step your way through the various things that you need to do. If you do need to switch from one job to another, just mentally let the other one go, focus on the next one, but just try. One of the things that often happens is we're, with the best will in the world, we're trying to get it all done. And you're halfway through an email. Oh, there's a notification that goes off in the corner of the screen. Oh, you look at that, you open that. Oh, you're halfway through that. Another notification comes. Next thing, you've got 10 half-written emails, half a dozen half-read, notices and other things. And all of a sudden, the build up. And so we need to take care with the way in which we work. So technology can be a great facilitator in helping us to do that efficiently and effectively, or it can become a tyrannical master in terms of, because there's things coming at us, notifications all the time. Turn off unnecessary notifications. Don't interrupt the flow of a task unless you absolutely need to. So complete that thing before you turn off your notifications and just go to the next email you need to look at. So just go through one thing, one step at a time, pace ourselves. But the use of technology is, in many ways, I think, is becoming part of the problem for many people, not part of the solution.
It was supposed to make everything easier, for goodness sake. And so it's so interesting. And I love that previous question where, I think it can be so difficult, obviously, to switch between tasks. one of the ways that I've been using to hack that is creating certain blocks during the day where I really viciously defend those blocks. So doing my email before I even get to work in the morning. I also use smells, which sounds very odd, but I have a certain incense that I'll burn at the beginning of the day or a beginning of a block where it's deep work and it's all notifications off. And then at other times, there'll be a certain candle that I'll burn. So I'm hoping to kind of create like a Pavlovian response for this is the deep work smell, and this is the relaxing, noticing notifications, responding to people smell, and this is the email incense. So whatever that looks like, maybe you sit in a different place or in a different chair or using something to create that switch for you as well.
Yes, that chunking or compartmentalizing your time can be very, very helpful, because often when we're jumping too much from one thing to another, not helpful. And I think also choosing when you do work, like you said before, deep work, you've got something quite complex. I find for myself to do that sort of deep work reasonably early in the day when the mind's, fresh. So get a few things out of the way. Okay, now while still fresh, the mind's in the right state to address some deep work, and do that deep work. But we're often bouncing too much from one thing to another all the time. And that creates a kind of a mental load that is absolutely exhausting. And the emotional, physiological response, it's exhausting as well. We need to conserve that. And a lot of it can be just changing how we work, how we use our time.
It's a great question to ask yourself, isn't it? Like, what is happening right now? Like almost just taking your hands and putting them on your table or your desk. And is the thing that I'm thinking about happening right now, or is it not? And then really almost physically bringing yourself back into that space right now, whatever that is.
Stephen Covey, it's an oldie, but it's a goodie in a way. But his sort of little 2x2 matrix of important, not important, urgent, not urgent. And these days we've kind of got conditioned into a sort of a sense that constant notifications and jumping from one thing to another, we often feel like things are much more urgent than they are in reality, and things are more important than they are. So, and if we can get to the first few really important things, then okay, well, that's good. We've got to make sure that they're not getting buried in amongst a whole lot of busy work stuff that appears to be urgent, appears to be important, but it's not.
Yeah, everything is in my top right-hand quadrant. Everything is urgent and important. I think that brings us to Alison's question here. Often people will take leave to recover from burnout and then come back to twice the amount of work, and then the burnout cycle repeats. What are some tools for communicating burnout levels to employers to ensure you're getting the rest and recovery time that you need, which is sometimes quite significant, in a way that can promote balance where possible or break cycles where possible? So I think really what she's asking is like, how do we have the kinds of conversations that we need to have to manage this?
Yeah, I think it highlights a really important point. We can do what we can do as individuals in terms of how we manage ourselves, but it's often not just about the individual, it's about the workplace. Sometimes it's about the work culture, sometimes it's about expectations, a misalignment of values that we have, and those that are important in the workplace, finding meaning. So having those kinds of conversations with one's employer, so that we don't just keep repeating a particular cycle, a mismatch between expectations and what we actually have the time and resources to do. We can always learn to use our time and resources better, but maybe there is a mismatch that really does need to be addressed. And so these conversations are very, very important. In terms of, some of the kinds of things, it's interesting, organization and some of the evidence, and I'll just list a few here, that an article in the Harvard Business Review, and they're looking at the kinds of healthy workplace cultures, but things that organizations do that take stress management seriously, for example. So an organization that actually provides tools to help people, that there's people feel like they have a level of control and input into decisions that are made, into how things are structured, how things are done. And very often, if you've got kind of management not listening to the workers who are actually doing the work, then it's like, you're covering your eyes and your ears, because the people who are actually doing the work will often have so much valuable input about what the needs are and how things can be done better. Social support that is actually a part of the workplace, but also part of the culture. You can't sort of assume that support is always just something that comes from the top down, but when you're looking out for each other and you ask after each other and how are you going? And so that really matters. A workplace that fosters that. Shared decision making is another thing, and high quality performance management. So they were 5 of the things that were identified in some of the research about organizations that helped prevent burnout. So the individual, but working with the collective. And mind you, if we really do find there's a total mismatch between what we're really passionate about, what we're interested in, the values that we have, what we find meaningful, etc., then if there really is a mismatch, then we need to consider, is this the best place for me to be working in the longer term? Is it really suiting me well? And if the only reason we're working there is because of an external, external or extrinsic motivation of the money or position or something else, then that's not going to sustain us. If there's real meaning and purpose in the work that we're doing, then that is much more likely to sustain us during challenging times and to energize us.
I think there's also an amount of bravery required to have those conversations, to be the first person in the team to put up their hand and say, I'm burnt out, or I'm really stressed and I'm really feeling this. But in the groups and teams that we've worked with at M3CS, one of the things that we notice is it takes, one person to say something, and it's not like a Debbie Downer conversation of like, oh, I'm complaining, we've got too much work. It's like, yeah, we all have too much work. Is there a way that we can divide the work up? Is there a way that we could all go to the boss? And if you're the boss, if you are a leader in your organization, to be vulnerable and open about your own workload, to be honest about how you're managing it or not managing it, and then to be figuring out solutions together, like actually saying those things out loud and figuring out how you figure out a solution together, whether that's, okay, we are going to get a yoga teacher in, or, Andrew's asked a great question of saying, how do we culturally bring this in? Could we do a collective comma in an afternoon? We'll send you a recording of Craig doing the comma exercise, because that's something we've noticed that teams will use. You'll sit down together and say, look, this is a 2-minute recording of a comma exercise. Humor me. Just have a listen to it. I think this Craig guy knows what he's talking about. Let's just take a breath and sit and, look at a way that we could just de-stress and refocus for a moment this afternoon together.
Yeah, I think workplaces that collectively take it on, like people are informed, from management through all the people that are working in different parts of an organization. If everybody's informed as to, what it's about, why it matters, a little bit of the evidence on it, but you can start to bring it into the culture of how a workplace works. So, you have your meetings, for example, where everybody's not on their phone trying to answer emails at the same time as they're at the meeting. Your meeting, just focus on one thing at a time. You don't encourage people to multitask. You encourage them to use their time, chunk their time well. And people also, this is really important these days, especially since COVID and work from home, many will feel like I never get a break because my technology's in the home and I've gotten used to answering emails at all times of day and night, and people expecting answers at all times of day or night. And we've never drawn the boundaries about, when to stop, when's enough. This is time to stop and time for rejuvenation. Am I taking time to exercise and look after myself and spend time with the people who are really important to me outside of work, and taking all that time for self-care and making sure I sleep rather than sleeping and constantly scrolling my phone in the middle of the night and checking stuff? So do we know how to set reasonable boundaries around what we're doing? And there's no one thing that's going to be right for everybody, but if we're noticing the stress and the effects of what we're doing online too much, not drawing boundaries, then we need to take some personal responsibility for that. But go into the workplace and have a conversation. How can we make this work environment better for everybody? How can we reduce that mental load? How can we improve our efficiency but use less energy to do that? So they're important conversations to have, and it often just takes a brave person for everybody, including the management, to say, "Thank heavens, that's a really valuable, offering, and let's do something about it."
I love that there are also so many. I mean, I love technology, and then I love that there's more technology for managing the technology. But there, if you're looking at what are the boundaries, I love when someone at the bottom of their email will say, I may respond to this outside of working hours, but I don't expect you to. You're communicating that boundary just with a little line under your email. I think that's also really powerful for a leader or a boss to include in their email. So you're not expected to respond on a Saturday morning. And I think with your device, you can put a lock on your phone so you can't access it after a certain time. You can change the screen on your laptop or your desktop so that the blue light ratio will change throughout the day. There's a great app called Flux. We are not sponsored by Flux, but that you can use to actually change that, or setting timers for your notifications so that, after 5 p.m., you're not going to be getting work email notifications on your device. So you can artificially put those in and run those experiments on yourself to make sure that those boundaries are there, and, help you if maybe you don't have great discipline with doing those yourself. You can put these artificial boundaries in place so that you can develop those habits of healthy boundaries a little better. Yeah. Oh, we're getting so many. Oh, I love this. Nick saying the power of the schedule send with emails as well. Use something like Boomerang so that you can schedule things for later, and then they can come during, a different time. We've got a bunch of other questions, but I am very conscious of the time. So we'll make sure that we answer those when we send you out an email with this, and we'll make sure we send you a recording of a beautiful meditation for you to be able to practice this. Because we know that these are the muscles that you have the opportunity to develop. It can feel really tricky at the beginning when you're first starting to implement some of these practices and put some of these good boundaries in place. But by practicing them over time, Craig, you always describe it as the gym for your mind. You're starting to really build those muscles and being able to powerfully make those choices, and hopefully over time, getting better at being able to make those better decisions and have more agency for how you spend your time.
Wonderful. And so thank you very much as well, Megan, for your input here. Some of this has been of some interest in use, and for those who would like to learn more about it, certainly can look at that course where we unpack a lot of these things week by week and give those strategies in that burnout course.
Yes. So we will also send you a link. Keep an eye on your inbox because we'll have a special offer for you. But our Navigating Burnout, this is my favorite course name, I have to say. Navigating Burnout, Flourishing in Work and Life, which is quite a lofty claim, but it is a really beautiful course. I'm not just saying that because it's ours. We have 2 more cohorts this year. So there'll be one coming up in June, and then we'll have another one in mid-September. So if this is something that you really want to learn to implement better, it is a really beautiful course. We've just launched it this year, and we'd love to have you join us. And also, as always, we offer loads of free events and recordings and meditations. So please, do join us for next month's seminar as well, free seminar, which will be for Mindful in May. So lots of fantastic offers and conversations happening then as well.
It's a wonderful Elise Bailey, so which will be great, and her charity philanthropic venture, Mindful in May. That's where it all came from. So I love listening to what she's got to say about mindfulness and how it can help that sort of philanthropic spirit.
Yeah, wonderful. Professor Craig Hassard, as always, thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us. If you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to reach out and keep an eye on your inbox for that special offer for our burnout program. We'll see you soon.